through sort of medium to low density suburban areas. It's not going through high rises whatsoever. So that's the background to the Inner West Light Rail extension. I'm going to throw it over to Harlan to run through a few key stats and points of sort of patronage and then travel behaviour as well. We're also going to show, and Tim Poole sort of referenced it, there's a 30-minute city concept, which was in the federal government's Smart Cities document, which was released last year. It's also being pushed by the Greater Sydney Commission. What can we do within 30 minutes? In Sydney, that's a big deal because it is very hard to move around. And so we've retrospectively applied that concept to the extension to see, what the extension has actually unlocked. Which areas can people now travel to that they can't or haven't been able to travel to previously? So we've done that analysis, and so we'll present that as we go. And I'll be back to summarise things.
Thanks, Nick. My name's Harlan, as mentioned before. So first, let's have a little bit of a look at some patronage figures for the Inner West Light Rail and for the public transport network in Sydney as a whole. As you can see, public transport patronage in Sydney has grown a lot over the last 5 or so years, especially in the last 3 years or so. It's grown massively. Heavy rail and bus, as you can see, are taking the lion's share and maintaining it pretty well. But what's interesting to note is that the light rail patronage, although it is a small proportion of all patronage in Sydney on public transport, the increase from 2010-11 to 2015-16 is 72%, which is quite a significant jump. So in that time, there's been the extension of light rail to Dulwich Hill, and a whole bunch of other incentives have been implemented by government during that time. And at the moment, or at the end of 2015-16, light rail patronage makes up 1.4% of all patronage on public transport in Sydney. And remembering that this is just a single line, it's not really a network, it's quite an impressive feat. So here's just the Inner West Light Rail patronage on its own, sort of zoomed in a bit more. And you can see that starting from June 2011, the government had purchased, or were moving to purchase the line back from the private operator. They've also introduced at that time periodical tickets, which were never available on light rail before, so there's a bit of a jump. But most of the increase in patronage has occurred since the Inner West Light Rail came online, and new rolling stock, and the introduction of integrated electronic ticketing called Opal, and greater peak services. And this is just a bit of a look at month-to-month patronage. This is from the Opal electronic ticketing data. This has only recently become publicly available. So you can see from July through to December that it's generally a bit all over the place. And the point of showing this slide is that there are quite a lot of variables that affect patronage on this line. So you've got school holidays, the beginning and ends of university semesters. The key one in here though is the Opal fare policy revision. So Opal used to allow you to take 8 paid journeys a week, and after that it would be free for all public transport travel. That was changed in September, and now it's half price travel after 8 fares. And that's sort of explaining that little drop in patronage there. The other thing that's not explained immediately there is that what people were doing because of the free travel after 8 paid journeys is using the light rail system to travel between 2 stops to basically ramp up their 8 trips very quickly early in the week, and then get free travel for the rest of the week, which is now not an incentive anymore. However, at the same time, there is now no interchange penalty in Sydney anymore to change between modes, which there was previously. Another couple of things to note are these track work shutdowns toward the end of the year. The partial line shutdown right at the end there is actually the work at George Street and Hayes Street for the CBD and South East Light Rail project, where Inner West Light Rail services were disrupted for a number of weeks, and they were operating only between, I think it was the Convention Centre and Dulwich Hill. So we've identified some key drivers of patronage growth. Probably the most important one is access to major destinations along the line, especially the Piedmont Peninsula, which also allows access into the Sydney CBD. Introduction of integrated electronic ticketing. Previously light rail didn't have integration with other fares very much at all. It was mostly just single and return tickets that the operator sold. There have been increases in service frequency during the peak times, new rolling stock, new facilities such as new shelters at stations, new platforms, new signage and branding. It's now part of the Transport brand. It used to be its own sort of orphan brand previously. And there have been some broader public transport network changes in the last couple of years. An important one is in the CBD in Sydney, the bus network has changed to accommodate construction of the CBD and South East Light Rail. And what that's meant is that there are quite a lot of bus services from the Inner West which have been impacted by that. And the Inner West Light Rail, being a segregated line, does provide some better reliability and, if in some cases, closer access to summer destinations on the western half of the CBD in particular. So there's a good chance that there have been some people shifting away from some of those bus services and onto light rail as a result of that. This is a similar map to what Nick had shown just before. This is an 800 metre catchment for stations on the Inner West Light Rail. As you can see in the red on the left, which is predominantly a north-south alignment there, you've got an 800 metre catchment around the new stations. What's not shown here are the bus links that mainly run east-west, and the rail lines you can see on here in the yellow also run east-west. This corridor here really has very little in the way of north-south public transport connections apart from this line. And as you'll see in the next slide, this is I better explain this first, sorry. This is showing 30-minute public transport accessibility in Sydney. Now, this is based on a data set called General Transit Feed Specification. It's issued by Transport for New South Wales for app developers primarily to use in developing transport information apps and real-time data apps. And so what this is actually the service and timetable information for all public transport in Sydney. Now, this is obviously just one section, but the data set covers the whole state of New South Wales. And at Jacobs, we're able to use this now in a geographic information system to plot origins and destinations and show what accessibility by public transport looks like and test different scenarios with different lines and different service offerings. So this one here is showing access to Pyrmont Bay as a destination. And this is showing it without the extension from Lilyfield to Dulwich Hill. So Lilyfield is just on the edge there of the grey area. And with the Inner West Light Rail extension, you can see that 30-minute public transport accessibility extends quite a lot further down south, almost as far as Dulwich Hill to get to Pyrmont Bay. You can also see the same effect for Waratah Mills. This is travel from Waratah Mills, so if you live in that area around that stop. Without Inner West Light Rail extension, you can travel in this sort of broad area. And with the Inner West Light Rail extension, your 30-minute public transport accessibility grows quite significantly. It's interesting to note that this is obviously leveraging off the existing public transport network and the interconnectedness you get with being able to change mode. But there hasn't actually been any change to the existing public transport network in terms of especially the bus network, to integrate Inner West Light Rail with buses. So this is allowing that without that. The same goes with the patronage that we were just looking at before, is that's all been based on this line coming into operation, but no further integration with the bus network occurring. So these are just some graphs that I'll run through quickly. These are from a thesis that I undertook at the end of 2015, or toward the end of 2015. And the thesis studied the impact of the light rail extension on travel patterns, similar to this presentation. And for the thesis, I undertook a 180 sample survey of light rail customers on light rail, at light rail stations along the extension. There's a one-page survey. It was quite a quick survey to undertake. So this one here is showing trip purpose, and as you can see, unsurprisingly, during the week, it's mostly commute trips that are occurring, and the weekend, a little bit of commuting, but mostly recreation and shopping. What that is highlighting, though, is that this line provides access to both work and leisure destinations. This here is showing the proportion of existing and new trips. So the top The top pie here is showing existing and new weekday trips. So there were surveys undertaken during the AM peak. Largely existing trips that have been shifted from other modes. And on the weekend, down at the bottom here in the green, there's an even larger proportion of existing trips that have been shifted from other modes. And as you can see here, this is showing mode shift for existing trips. During the weekdays, the proportion of that's shifted from existing public transport, mainly bus and train, is quite high. A little bit of shifting from driving a car, but on the weekend, the shift from driving a car is quite significant. And that's probably because the inner west of Sydney, and any of you who are familiar with it during weekends, traffic congestion is very, very high. Buses are also stuck in traffic congestion, and the level of service offered by public transport on the weekend is generally not as high as it is in the AM peak during the week. And finally, here are some top destinations. So respondents were asked to say where they were travelling to, what stop they would be getting off at. And as you can see, Pyrmont Bay, Fish Market and the Star, which are all in the Pyrmont Peninsula, are very popular destinations on this line. And on the weekend, Central Station and the Fish Market and the Star again. It's interesting to note that Pyrmont Bay is part of the reason it's such a popular stop for people to get off at is because you can walk across a bridge into the western half of the CBD quite easily. And again, like relating back to people who may have previously caught a bus, and their bus services have now changed in Sydney CBD, and the corridor that they're using in the CBD is more to the east of the CBD and not the west anymore, that they're now potentially travelling to Pyrmont Bay and walking straight across the bridge. And I'll hand you back over to Nick now to talk about looking forward and ongoing land use changes.
Thanks, Harlan. So just trying to look forward a little bit. I've included a few photos here. There's recent developments at the tram sheds, which is next to, it was formerly Harlan Park. It's next to the Jubilee stop, sort of halfway along the inner west line. It used to have old trams stabled and depoted there. It's been incorporated into a new development, which is now turned into a very successful restaurant precinct. And on the left there, we've also got the Lewisham West developments, also located close to the Lewisham train station. But even when I was doing the 2010 study, there was discussions with developers, with councils at the time, about how to turn over low density residential or low density commercial uses to gain, I guess, higher utilisation of the light rail system at those stops. And as part of that earlier study, we looked at having the stop in a slightly different location, but there was a lot of pressure from the development industry to actually locate it as slightly further south, so it could be right adjacent to the new developments. So in some ways, it slightly decreased, I guess, the integration of the heavy rail network, but at the same time, that was the negative, but at the same time, the benefit was that it's right in the middle of the new developments, and there's also new developments occurring on the other side of the light rail line, which are going to look something similar to that. There's also new developments happening further south towards Dulwich Hill, and then there was also very big proposals underway for the Bays precinct and Darling Harbour's close to the CBD, which has just been sort of reopened now after a couple of years of closure for that redevelopment. I guess one key point here is that we've seen a lot of the other light rail systems around Australia being tied into a sort of urban development program or precinct or something like that. The Inner West Light Rail extension hasn't been. It's sort of similar to the bus network. The bus network largely stayed the same with the light rail opening. There hasn't sort of been a coordinated land use or development plan along the light rail line. And so all of the patronage that we've been seeing, which is very good, very high, it hasn't actually been done off the back of something coordinated. So what we also just wanted to do is sort of tease out where does light rail in Sydney sit with some of the contemporary cities. We've got a few from Australia here. That's Croydon in the UK. We've also got a few examples from France as well. Utilisation is the passenger trips per line kilometre, and so based then on the population density per kilometre. The Sydney one at the bottom in the red is the 2016 numbers with just the Inner West light rail extension to Dulwich Hill. We've then looked forward to what would Sydney be in 2036 with the CBD and South East light rail. We've taken some patronage numbers there that are in the publicly available EIS, and then we've also assumed a small growth in the Inner West light rail as well. And so with both of those combined, you can actually see where Sydney might be able to sit in comparison. It's up around those French cities. So it's really come a long way, or it could potentially come a long way. But how do we get there? How would the Sydney system get up there? And so what was we just had a bit of a look around. What are some of the success stories, or what contributes to the success of building light rail patronage in other cities? And so we saw those three were at the top of that list there. And so really it's frequent services, they're convenient, quick. So the Inner West light rail is segregated. There's going to be a few small parts of the CBD and Southeast at the southeastern end segregated. They really are networks. It's not just one line. The Inner West has been doing all of this just as one line. And then also integration with land use and other public transport modes. So there's still a bit of a way to go. And let's just have a think as well about what could it be. We've seen from those other examples that frequency is a key determinant of driving patronage. Previously in Sydney, it's sort of been, if there's not many people using it, let's drop the frequency, which was sort of the wrong way to go about it. As we've seen from some of those European examples, we find more services equals more patronage. Here we just had a little think about what could we do with some increased services on the Inner West light rail. And so by building up services, we could actually get to doubling, theoretically doubling the patronage on that line. However, as well, it's not as simple as just throwing more light rail vehicles on or increasing the service frequency. It's an existing, used to be a freight corridor, as we said. There's speed limitations along certain sections. There's old bridges, there's varying track arrangements. So some of that might not be possible, but we still think that might be some scope in the future to increase service frequency along the Inner West light rail. And then really just wanted to tie off and summarise things. We have had that dramatic increase in patronage, and that has resulted from the extension to Dulwich Hill. But patronage is only really one high level measure of success. There's a lot of different measures out there. We've tried to just quickly explore and touch upon a lot of those different measures as well. So it's quite complex. Why people are travelling, when are people travelling, how can they get to and from certain destinations, what's happening with urban development. So it's all tied in together. So I guess one of our key points is really that let's not just aim for patronage, but let's try and unpack and explore some of those other determinants along the way. And by doing that, you'll end up with a much more successful light rail system. Thank you.